والاستفادة والحث بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى خير دلالة الهدى وجه سبحانه وتعالى بقربه. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وعلمنا ما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما. يعني تعلم وتعني وتذكر وتذكير الإفادة والاستفادة والحث بالتمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الخير والدلالة على الهدى ابتغاء وجه سبحانه وتعالى وقرب الثواب. قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى فالله سبحان الله الحمد لله ولا اله الا الله ولا حول ولا قوه الا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحان الله وبحمده سبحان الله العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد السادي ونبي الرجال اجمعنا به في كل اطوارنا وعلى اله وصحبه النور عدد خلق القرآن سيدنا دعوة الكلمات عدد كل حرف كتب ويكتب وقرئ ويقرأ وسمع ويسمع ورؤيا ويرى بالأرضين ودهر الدهر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Continuing inshallah from yesterday's lesson, we spoke about al-tanaji or al-munaja, people and the conversations that they have between themselves and in groups and the effects that that has on the world and on creation. People that gather together merely to discuss goodness, Allah then from those gatherings spread goodness. Habib gives the example, he says that certain gatherings, because of the pleasure and acceptance that it has with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there are clouds of mercy which raise for those gatherings. And those clouds, like the clouds that we have, the winds push them, right? The water raises from the oceans or from the rivers, wherever they are, and then the winds push them, and they pour down rain onto barren lands. He says, likewise, these majalis, especially if it's majalis of the awliya and of the salihin, whether it's majalis of ilm or of knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows clouds to raise from those gatherings, and then they go to barren hearts and rain upon them, that through those gatherings, people that aren't Muslim come into Islam in different parts of the world. Right? Everything is connected and everything depends on a person's interaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the intentions. So you can have a gathering in one part of the world and intend hidayah for someone else in another part of the world, and in your mind the physical means of how that will happen, you don't know. But if you understand and if you realize that it is in the qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow that to happen, then that will happen. And some of our mashayikh, they would even, when people come, they would gather people to their houses just for a meal. So if there's guests that come, they would gather for a meal, and they would come and serve the guests, right? And the guests would go away, and they'll just talk a little bit, some anashid, whatever it is, and they'll go. But they'll say, we intend through this gathering that Allah spread hidayah through the whole of mankind, right? And then you can see the effects that will come from there. Everything comes back to the hearts of people in their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we spoke about also yesterday how even in performing this duty of da'wah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though He has commanded us to call people, we do not look down upon the people that we are calling, and we see khair in them, and instead we even see sinners as having the opportunity to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even the non-Muslims, Allah can guide them and they can come into Islam, and Allah can raise them to higher stations. And this is something that we would hear, or it's a question many times people will ask, how do we deal with people who are sinful? How do we not have, people say you have to have the saghira for the deen. You have to have this, when someone contradicts the Sharia, then you have to be upset for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's true. It was part of the sifa of the Prophet sallallahu كان يعفو عن الذنب إذا كان في حقه وسببه. He used to forgive sins and overlook faults if it regarded his own self. وإذا عُضِيَ حق الله لم يقم أحد لغضبه. But if the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were taken, or the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were transgressed, then no one would be able to stand up to his anger. But the question is, what are you angry at? Are you angry at the sin that the person committed, that sin manifesting, or are you angry with the person? And depending on which, were you angry with the sin that manifested from the person or the person, that will determine how you deal with that person, right? And many times we find the Prophet ﷺ also, when people had transgressed the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would not reprimand them individually in a group. He would say, and this is known of his sunnah, when people will gather, he would say, what is the problem with people that they do this and they do that? Meaning, so people don't feel, understanding that the ego doesn't like to be told what to do. So if someone was in the group that had done something, would say, what is the matter with some people that they do this or they do that? So that person doesn't feel like he's being singled out for this particular sin. And generally, even people that aren't doing that sin, they would feel like, you know what, we have to be careful about this. And then if there was something, to go and advise that person sincerely. And we spoke about yesterday as well, even in advising a person, the strategies required when you're advising a person for da'wah purposes. Are they on the level that they will accept that advice from you or not? Right? Imam Ghazali also sets the rule, and he says, and this is a qawaid in da'wah, it's one of the rules of da'wah, that if you are trying to prevent a wrong, and in your preventing that wrong, it's going to lead to more harm or more wrong, then you're not allowed to prevent that wrong, right? And you have to find a different way of getting to that person. So then if a person is doing something, you need to go and give sincere advice. And if the advice is sincere, right, then that heart accepts it. And many times also the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they would give advice to people and it wasn't accepted from them, right, I spoke to him, but he didn't listen. It's not the approach. Whereas I spoke to him, but I wasn't sincere, so he didn't listen. And they would go and rectify the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and go make istighfar. Perhaps there was some su'ul dhan, perhaps there was some nafs. And then they go back to the person and advise the person again, right? And if the person didn't accept, they would blame themselves. Again, it's not because of the way we deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're not worried about that person and their relationship with Allah in terms of what's between their hearts. We don't know. But Allah has given us a sharia by which we operate. So when we deal with that person, we are also concerned of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we spoke about this before, and many times people ask this question. So if you see a person committing sins in front of your eyes, then how do you actually deal with them? And again, with the same qawaid, right? The instant that person falls away from that sin, you have to believe in your heart that they have repented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you meet them the next day thinking, astaghfirullah, this guy yesterday was a sin, what? Pride has entered your heart and you are destroyed. Habib al-Mashhur, and many times you hear from Mashaykh, they would say, well, a'yadu billah, wa nasallahu salam wal afiyah. If you even see two people committing zina in front of your eyes, and you pass by a tree and you see them on the other side, him running that way and she running the other way, you have to believe within that instant that when they stood up from that act, they regretted in their hearts and they repented sincerely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah accepted the repentance in that instant and raised them to a state higher than, right? If you don't do that, you will always forever look down upon him. That's in your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? With regards to the Sharia and the implementation of the Sharia, obviously that has its place. And we spoke about also how the Sharia requires in this regard for witnesses, and how it is something Allah wants sitr. And something in our day and age we have to also practice, right? We are in the age of exposing, right? Someone does something wrong, the first thing, even journalistic articles are based, they call it investigative journalism, right? To expose people. And there's a difference if there is something and a person has been advised, right? In the Sharia has its ways, you advise someone, you see them doing something wrong, you warn them, you tell them this is detrimental, especially if it's detrimental for society, right? Therefore, a person who is wronged, this is one of and the hadith speak about this as well. A person who is wronged and oppressed, they are allowed to expose the oppressor after warning him and telling him that if you don't give me my rights back, then I'm going to expose you. But the sincere advice in private before actually taking the public sphere, we don't have that anymore. And many times you would find that if you advise someone sincerely, they take the advice. And if a person is a pure-hearted person, when you advise them, no matter what their first reaction might be, but the next day or when they go home at night and they actually, ponder, they will think and they'll come right. But if we practice this, and this is why the Prophet also said, ad-dinu nasiha. And so Habib spoke about how in having this regard and looking at even non-Muslims and even at people who are in sin in this particular way, then one, while doing da'wah, doesn't become proud and arrogant. And then he goes on, فَإِنَّا نَعْلَمُ أَنَّ كُلَّ مَا أُوتِينَا مِنَ الْإِيمَانِ وَمِنْ عَمَلِ الصَّالِحِ مَنٌّ مِنَ اللَّهِ. Because we have certainty that everything that we have been given with regards to our iman and our ability to do good deeds comes from where? It is a favor and a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not from ourselves. قُلْ لَا تَمُنُّوا عَلَيَّ إِسْلَامَكُمْ. The Bedouin Arabs, when they accepted Islam, they were trying to express like they did something great to the Prophet ﷺ, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the Prophet to tell, قُلْ لَا تَمُنُّ عَلَيْهِ إِسْلَامَكُمْ. Do not try to get points with me by saying you accepted Islam. بَلِ اللَّهُ يَمُنُّ عَلَيْكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored you. Do not say that you have favored us by accepting Islam. Allah has favored you by giving you Iman. أَنْ هَدَاكُمْ لِلْإِيمَانِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. In that Allah has favored you by giving you Iman if indeed you are truthful. So when someone accepts Islam, they're not doing a favor to Islam and they're not doing a favor to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Instead, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored you, right? على أننا أيضا على خوف أن يسلب عنا أي خير, right? And we are also fearful in every instant that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can take away any goodness that He has given to us. أو أن نحول إلى أي سوء, or that Allah can change our condition and we will become evil people and start doing evil deeds. ومع هذا الخوف رجاء أكبر منه في أن يقبلنا الله على ما فينا. And with this fear, we also have the greatest hope that Allah will accept us as we are. And these are the two wings Imam Ghazali speaks about, the raja and khawf. The wings of hope and the wings of fear. And a Muslim has to remain between these two wings. A bird needs two wings to fly, and a Muslim flies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with these wings of hope and fear. When your fear becomes too great, then you need to remind yourself of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the mercy is too great and you start becoming negligent, then you need to remind yourself of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And generally they would say towards the end of your life, the fear should be more than the hope should be more than the fear. And during your life, the fear should be more than the hope. This fear, right, is the greatest fear that the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change their condition in any time, or that they would lose that position that they have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, and people that read the Quran and understanding, Allah teaches us, وَلَا يَأْمَنُ مَكْرَ اللَّهِ إِلَّا الْقَوْمُ الْخَاسِرُونَ. No one is safe from the makr of Allah. Makr, it has like plotting and planning, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this in His, even though He says, وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهِ, that they plot and plan, and Allah also plans. It has an evil sort of connotation, but Allah uses it from Himself to give the idea that فَلَا يَأْمَنُ مَكْرَ اللَّهِ إِلَّا الْقَوْمُ الْخَاسِرُونَ. No one feels safe from the plotting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except the khasirin, except those who are losers. Means even the awliya, in their most intimate moments of proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is still that fear, right? That because when the closer you are, like you say, the higher you are, the harder you fall. Meaning the closer you are, the more you take into account for. Osman said, Imam al-Junayd rahmah ta'ala, the beggar was asking in the streets, and he thought in his mind, would that this person found a job and didn't beg in the streets. When he went home that day, in the dream, he saw the angels coming and telling him to, and there's many stories, even in the Ihya al-Ulumuddin, Imam Ghazali speaks about how, in his chapter on the life and the hereafter, how even at the time of death, Shaitan has tried his whole life to distract you, but he keeps his greatest tricks and ploys for you when? At the time of death, right? And there are some narrations that talk about from stories of the pious as well. They would say even at the time of death, a person will feel immense thirst, right? And Iblis will come with a cup of water, and he'll say, you just need to disbelieve, or you need to believe in me, and I'll give you this cup of water. What's important to know is at the time of death, also when they talk about reading the kalima, right? Or at the time of death, you'll find them saying, say la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. It's not what you say with your tongue. It's what's in your heart at that particular time. Just as in your grave, when we ask those three questions, who is your Lord and what is your deen and who is this person sent to you, right? It will not be your tongue, but it will actually be your heart that will reply to those questions. So has your heart been conditioned upon la ilaha illallah? Has your lifestyle, your thoughts, your ideas been conditioned on the deen of Islam and Muhammad Rasulullah? That is your heart that will. And this is the harm of sins. They say al-ma'asi baridul kufr. Sins are like, barid means the postage. When you send someone a letter, you write it now and you put it in the post. It reaches when? It can reach after a week, 2 weeks. They say sins are like the postage man of sins, meaning al-ma'asi barid al-kufr. Sins are the postage mans of kufr, meaning a sin you committed now, the effect of it can be felt after a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, 5 years, 10 years, at the end of your life. That is why they would say certain, for example, they would give the warnings for people, and they say whoever commits this sin, then he will have a su'al khatim. Right? A person, one of the things we do in the spiritual path, a person who claims to have certain spiritual stations with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to deceive people, right? And he doesn't have that, then he'll be cut off from ever reaching those stations and he'll have a su'al khatim. Right? Because he's making claims against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning he can live his whole life. But this is a sin which, at the end, the Prophet ﷺ, when he said al-mubiqat, when he spoke about the 7 great destructive sins, right? Ash-shirku billah, right? Al-qatl, killing. Also a sihr and black magic, right? A person, when we find this is common, a person will go to one of these, people, whatever, and they'll go do black magic to this particular person, whatever it is. And they think, okay, nothing's happened to their life. But now in their final moments, these sins come back to haunt them if they haven't repented from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why they talk of the major sins. And the Prophet ﷺ in certain hadith mentions 7 major sins. In other hadith, he mentions other major sins. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he collected them all in one book, mentioning all the hadith, and they are over I think over 50, over 100 major sins which a person is warned about, which if a person doesn't repent from them, then they could lead to su'al khatim. Just having a bad opinion about a person can have a negative effect on your iman. What did the Prophet ﷺ say? بِحَسْبِ شَرِّ الْمُؤْمِنِ أَنْ يَحْقَرَ أَخَاهُ الْمُسْلِمِ. It is enough as a sin for a believer to disparage or look with disdain upon his brother. It is enough as a sin, meaning there's no greater sin than that, right? And this is why this fear all the time. And that is why Sayyidina Umar anhu would make dua, and he would say, may Allah have mercy on the person who makes me aware of my sins, right? And the dua of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always is, Allahumma bassirni bi'uyubi. Allah, make me aware of my faults, so that you can always rectify. Because we are created as sinners, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? As long as a person realizes that, and there's always this humbleness to want to come back and repent, start again, then it's fine, right? But if a person lives with a sense of arrogance and know it all, then if Allah has mercy on him, Allah will break him by him falling into sin, right? Or being exposed. Sometimes people get exposed, right? And they think that this is a punishment, but sometimes it's the greatest mercy for them. Because if they weren't exposed, they didn't have fear of people, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so Allah uses their fear of people to prevent them from that sin. So now that they're exposed, they stop committing that sin, right? Out of fear of people. And then later on they will realize, but you know what, I'm fearful of people and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees me. But that's a mercy for him because he stopped. And if Allah didn't want to have mercy, he would have kept him in that sin and concealed it from people, right? And then take him away and he's had a su'al khatim. So the fear of a bad death is one of the greatest fears that the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have, right? And also for any khair of them to be taken away, they would always ask for husn al-khatima and husn al-sabiqah. Why would they ask for husn al-sabiqah? They don't just make dua for a good ending, they ask for a good pre-eternal ordainment, because everything that happens in your life has already been ordained. So you ask Allah, we don't know what the pre-ordainment was, but we ask that we have a good pre-ordainment so that the khatimah can be good. As well, keeping in mind that we have the greatest hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept us for what we are. In the dua they make, Allahumma qabalna ala ma fina. Accept us for how we are. We are this, we have these sins, we have these faults, we have all of this. Accept us, because this is the greatest goal, to be accepted and loved in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with our faults and with our shortcomings, but keeping in mind that we are trying, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help us to overcome these things. وَيَقْبَلَ مِنَّا مَا وَفَّقَنَا لَهُ مِنَ الْخَيْرِ, that Allah would accept from us what He allowed us to do of good deeds. Right? He's the one that allowed us to do good deeds, not ourselves. وَيُدْرِجَ ذَلِكَ فِي أَعْمَالِ مَشَايِخِنَا وَأَئِمَّتِنَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الطَّرِيقِ خِيَارِ الْخَلِيقَةِ. And not just that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept the deeds, but He sort of filed them. Yudrij means to file something, right? He puts them into the deeds of the great the mashayikh and the leaders and the scholars of this chain going back to the Prophet. And therefore, they would always say, when you intend something, if you can't make any good intentions, or if good intentions don't come to, any new intentions don't come to your mind, then you say, Nawayna ma nawa salafana salih. We intend what our pious predecessors intended. Or you're doing an action, you say, Allah, enter this action into the actions of the salihin. Why? Our actions are not acceptable. But if Allah puts it into the actions of the salihin, then it will be accepted. Just like the jama'ah. Why do we read salah in jama'ah? Is because we would never have the hope that, or we never have the yaqeen that our own salah will be accepted in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But perhaps there's someone in the jama'ah that their salah is accepted, so Allah will accept all of them. This comes in the hadith, right? That Allah looks upon the hearts of the congregation, and the one who has the greatest presence of heart, then Allah writes the reward of the salah according to the level of the highest. And the salah of all of theirs is accepted. This is one of the greatest virtues of salah in congregation. Right? And if there's no one in that congregation who is accepted in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mere fact that they gather and everyone's thinking that perhaps it's because of someone else's, right? Because of that, Allah then accepts everyone's salah. So the same thing, when you do actions, we don't have any certainty that that action that we did is accepted. Ya Allah, we are just doing this duty. We've been put on this earth. You've commanded us. We're doing it to the best of our ability, and it's not accepted. But accept it like how you accepted, or put it as part of the actions of those whom you've accepted. فَيُدْرِجَهَا فِي أَعْمَالِ مَنْ قَبْلَهُمْ. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then accepts it in the actions of those who came before. So many times also we'll hear Habib Umar at certain times, even just last Thursday, right? So people will come and the guy will speak about how, he accepted Islam because of a dream he saw of Habib Umar, or something. It's like, it involves Habib Umar. I mean, Habib Umar speaks, what will he say? He'll say, and what is this that you see happening in these people? It is the original call of the Prophet ﷺ, and it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's religion. And we are just means. He doesn't even regard himself as having a part in playing. Even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our view of them and the awliya is that because of their status, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah uses them. But when they see things happening, they don't even think that it's because of their own selves. They always take it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ, right? فَيُدْرِجَهَا فِي أَعْمَالِ مَنْ قَبْلَهُمْ, right? Because we are merely fulfilling that trust that has been placed on our shoulders and continuing that legacy of conveying the trust to those who come after us. حَتَّى تَنْدَرِجَ كُلُّهَا فِي أَعْمَالِ وَأَحْوَالِ وَأَقْوَالِ وَأَفْعَالِ وَنِيَّاتِ وَمَقَاصِدِ وَشُؤُونِ سَيِّدِ الْوُجُودِ Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, right? And so we intend by our actions that it get accepted in the actions of our teachers, right? And their actions are contained and accepted together with the actions of those that came before them. Until he says all of those actions are then accepted. What is our greatest desire? Is that Allah accepts it as part of the actions of who? Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts it, right? All of these actions, in the actions, the states, the words, the doings, the intentions, and the objectives, and all the affairs connected to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it is indeed. So if someone accepts hidayah in your hands today, right, or someone is guided, it is indeed whose acceptance? The Prophet ﷺ. And if you have ever experienced someone accepting Islam at your hands, or you're in the gathering when someone accepts Islam, right? There's sort of this electricity in the air, right? If you've ever been in that experience, it's a beautiful experience, right? And it's also one of the quickest ways to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But who is the one who is most happy when a person comes into the deen? Who is the one who is most happy when any person comes into the deen? Which human being? Which human being is most happy when any person comes into Islam? The Prophet ﷺ, of course, right? And when a person accepts Islam, that feeling is his happiness that you are feeling. Because if the Prophet ﷺ is happy, then all the awliya are happy. And if the Prophet ﷺ is happy, then the entire samawat wal arda are all happy. Right? And this is why they say da'wah, calling people to Allah, is the quickest route to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ. Right? You spoke about this, how if you take care of what the job the Prophet ﷺ came to do, then in the barzakh he'll take, because the actions are presented to him. And what he sees in the tradition, it is mentioned, what he sees of khair, he praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what he sees of shar, of evil, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive, right? Meaning the Prophet ﷺ makes dua for his ummah according to the actions that he sees from his ummah. So if he sees you working hard and doing the job, is he not going to be making dua from you, right? And this is when they talk of bringing gladness to the heart of the Prophet ﷺ. One of our intentions of doing lessons and going about our dealings is to bring gladness to the heart of the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Is when our actions are presented to him and he sees what so-and-so is doing, or this particular class, or this particular organization, or this particular institute, they are doing things which are pleasing to the Prophet ﷺ, then his heart becomes, and when the Prophet ﷺ is happy with you, then who's happy with you? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Without the Prophet ﷺ even making dua for you, if he becomes glad, right, if he becomes happy with you, Allah's mercy then would descend upon you. That is why in the even when with people, why would people do khidmah of the mashayikh? What was the purpose of doing khidmah, and even of the Prophet ﷺ? Because someone who serves you falls into your good pleasure because you make their life easy, right? And naturally, if anyone does a favor for you, what do? You make dua for them, right? Look at that person, that servant of the Prophet ﷺ. He used to serve the Prophet ﷺ. What did the Prophet ﷺ tell him? Ask anything, right? Just through khidmah, ask anything that you want. And then he says, "Oh Prophet of Allah, give me a few days to think about it." So he comes back after a few days and he tells the Prophet ﷺ, asking him, "Have you thought about it?" He said, "Yes." And the meaning of the hadith is, I thought about all the different things in the world that a person can. It's finite. It's going to come to an end. But I want, O Prophet of Allah, murafaqataka fil jannah. I want your companionship in the hereafter. The Prophet says, like, are you sure? Is there not anything else? Trying to see, like, has he really understood? Right? This is the greatest goal. And he says, and he repeats it. And the Prophet says what? So assist me for you to attain that because of this sujood, right? That now, in order to get that, you assist me in doing that by worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly. And there is also a way sometimes we find people, when they do khidmah, they think that they don't need to do their ibadah, right? And they become lazy. So sometimes if there's a gathering or if there's any work to be done, a person will be involved in khidmah, but they think, okay, because I'm involved in khidmah, now, okay, you know what, I don't need to do my sunnahs, I don't need to do my adhkar and my awrad, right? Because you're doing khidmah. And they say the one who does khidmah, he gets the reward of all the people that are doing the ibadah, right? But the true sign of the khidmah, whether it is sincere or not, is what? Is when you have those free moments, you use them to cover up whatever you must of your ibadah, or what you can cover up what you must of your ibadah to the best of your ability. And what you can't, you would get the reward for that. So sometimes there was actually, what was amazing is there was once a scholar, a very great scholar, that came to Tarim, and he asked Habib Umar, one of the Thursday night talks, he asked Habib Umar, and this is a wrestle that the students of knowledge and also the scholars have. When you have free time, do you use it to research and read, or do you increase? So you have your basic adhkar and awrad that you do, right? But the basics are basic. But the nature of ibadah is what? It's like you're jamming the heart, the muscle of the heart. It gets stronger. When the heart gets stronger, you're able to bear more. And naturally, ibadah has a sweetness. So when you start doing ibadah, you want to do more and more. But likewise, knowledge also has a sweetness. And the more you read and research and you feel the sweetness of ilm, the more you want to do of that. But now you're being pulled between the two. When you have those free moments and free time, after you've done the basics. And when we talk about the basics, for example, you find a student of knowledge, he says, okay, you know, knowledge is more beneficial than nafil ibadah, but he's not reading tahajjud, and he's not reading his morning and evening adhkar, and he's not reading his awabin and ishraq, right? This is a deluded person, because that's not the nafil, that is the thawabit as-sunnah, right? Even though we call it nafil, but it was something the Prophet ﷺ never ever left. But for example, someone reads about Imam al-Haddad and how he would read 100 raka'at after his morning lessons in the Masjid Ba'alawi. So now this person thinks, oh, I want to read 100 raka'at. Say, okay, for you, it's better now to go in and read and study, especially if a person hasn't gone through the basics of the ilm, and especially the Ihya Ulumuddin. Imam Ghazali actually says you can't go and study a madhab until you've read the Ihya completely from cover to cover and practiced upon it, right? And so there's always this pull. Do I do my knowledge and revision and all my lessons, knowing that the Prophet ﷺ said that knowledge is more preferable to nafil ibadah, or do I increase in my salat on the Prophet ﷺ, or my ibadah, or my Quran recitation over and above the basics? And it was a beautiful answer Habib Umar gave, and it shows how a person needs to be in tune with themselves, otherwise you'll be taken for all right. He says, if your heart wants to do that ibadah and that ta'ah, right, and there's an inclination that now I want to do it, and then you do your revision, and this is a sign that this is now better, and you get the reward for actually doing that. But if you do it and you leave the ibadah and the worship and the adhkar and the urad and the salawat out of laziness, and you're using the ilm as an excuse, then you're not going to, and this is not the correct. Then you have to actually go in. So you have to train the nafs, so that the nafs becomes accustomed to the ibadah and it wants to do it. But now, and this is also a form of mujahada, now you have to leave what the nafs likes for the sake of what the sharia, what the Prophet ﷺ taught you, that this is actually better for you. And it could be happening the other way as well. فَذَلِكَ الْبَحْرُ الْخِضَمَ الزَّاخِرِ. And if a person intends and they hope, right, is that all of the actions and what they do gets accepted in the actions and the thoughts and the words and the states and the intentions and objectives of the Prophet ﷺ, and Habib Umar says, فَذَلِكَ الْبَحْرُ الْخِضَمَ الزَّاخِرِ. That is indeed the vastest and most expansive ocean, right? And again, coming back to this concept of congregations, right? Allah accepts the actions of one person, even though he might be a sinner, because of others. هُمُ الْقَوْمُ لَا يَشْقَى بِهِمْ جَلِيسُهُم. The famous hadith we know, when a person, if there's gatherings of dhikr, a person comes and he sits inside, and then Allah, the angels envelope them, mercy surrounds them, and Allah mentions them in the gathering greater than themselves. And then the angels say, oh Allah, there's one person that came to the gathering, but he is not part of them. He came because of another reason. Maybe he was waiting for someone, or even he might want to collect a debt from someone else. And what does Allah tell the angels? Right? That هُمَ الْقَوْمُ لَا يَشْقَى بِهِمْ جُلُوسُهُم. They are such a people that anyone that sits in their company will never be wretched. I've forgiven all of them. And that's the gatherings of dhikr, of any gatherings of dhikr which the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned. But now we look at, this concept is what? Is that what is impure gets accepted when it's part of something that is pure, right? So the example that Hamid is going to give is like an impurity. If you take a cup of something impure and pour it in the ocean, does the ocean get affected with that? So if you have a cup, if you have a jug of water, right, and you throw it into the ocean, if you have a jug of water that's impure, you can't make wudu from it. But you throw it into the ocean, and immediately you pick it up from the ocean as well. That water is now pure. What happened? Right? That small impurities in the ocean became pure. And this is the ocean of the Prophet ﷺ. If our actions get accepted into his ocean, right? الذي يتحول ما وضع فيه إلى الجواهر. That anything that is put into this ocean of the Prophet ﷺ, your own small efforts, your own small states, your own small intentions, your own small maqasid, if it gets accepted into the ocean of the Prophet ﷺ, it turns into pearls, right? وَلَوْ كَانَ ذَلِكَ الْمَوْضُوعُ مُلَطَّخًا أَنْتُمْ تَرَوْنَ بِحَارِ الدُّنْيَا, right? Even though that place which that whatever was put into that ocean was impure, right? It could have even been urine, right? But you just pour it into the ocean and you pick it up, immediately it becomes pure. Why? Is the ocean changes everything into its own constituency, right? وَلَوْ كَانَ ذَلِكَ الْمَوْضُوعُ مُلَطَّخًا أَنْتُمْ تَرَوْنَ بِحَارَ الدُّنْيَا هَذِهِ تَقْبَلْ حَتَّى أَوْسَاخَ النَّاسِ. You see, I mean, we're saying this, the oceans of this dunya, right? Even we have sewage that gets pumped into it, right? What does it do? It changes it all into into pure water, right? تأتي بها فتضعها فيه. You put all the impurities inside, وبعد ذلك تتحول فيها إلى ماء طاهر. After that, it changes into pure water, right? As long as the color, the smell, and the taste doesn't change. In the ocean, is so vast that it changes everything that's put into it into something pure. ويحلونه ويشربون منه. Right? The ocean, the power of the ocean is that it changes the constituency of even these impurities that we put inside, and it changes it into water. That water then can be purified and drunk, right? فلا يقولون قد دخل فيه الخمج والكدر. Right? People don't say now at the ocean that, oh, the ocean now is dirty. Right? What do they say? You say the ocean is dirty or the ocean is pure, right? Even though we know whatever is being put into the ocean, but the ocean remains. Why? It is such a powerful. It has the ability, and okay, we can say the salt content, whatever it is, but it remains pure, right? فكيف ببحر حبيب الرحمن لو اتصلنا به. So then, in a similar way, right? What then of the ocean of the Prophet ﷺ, if we are connected to it, if we throw ourselves into his ocean, whatever we are of our small actions and right, insignificance, the impurities that we have, whatever. But if you connect it to the Prophet ﷺ, what happens? It changes, right? And they would give the example of that Sahaba, right? When the Battle of Uhud, he was fighting, and his sword broke, right? Forget the name of the Sahaba. And the Battle of Uhud was one of the. If a person studies the battle, it's a very, very, it's very interesting story, moving story of how the battle took place, because this was the battle the Prophet ﷺ was actually injured in as well, right? And the Sahaba were fiercely trying to protect the Prophet ﷺ, and they had little means. And so the Sahaba is fighting, and his sword breaks, and they don't have extra swords. What does the Prophet ﷺ do? He picks up a stick or a twig and he gives it to him. The Sahaba think, oh, what am I going to do with a stick? Right? And as soon as he grabs the stick, it turns into a, right? And they call this now transmutation, right? It turns into a proper sword. And they will say that the Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him this ability to affect things, to change them from one state into another in an instance, right? So what then can't he do to your heart, right? Or to your spiritual state or to your mind if you connect, if you take what he brought with quwwah. We spoke about that quwwah. The Sahaba, when he took it, right, and he understood that this is the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't think, oh, is this twig going to, and how am I going to fight with it? It's coming from the Prophet, khalas, end of story. And this is why we follow the sunnah, right? Because that small sunnah, if you take it with quwwah, it can transform you. Now, فكيف ببحر حبيب الرحمن لو اتصلنا به فترجع أعمالنا على ما فيها تطهر وتصلح وتدور وتقبل وتدخل في المحيط الكبير. Right? And then all of our actions, right, whatever they contain of deficiencies and impurities, they will be purified, they will be corrected, they will be illuminated, and they will be accepted and then entered into the great ocean of the Prophet ﷺ. And that is why we follow the Sunnah, and that is why we bring to mind always the importance of following the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ for this particular reason, that we don't want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to look upon us and accept our actions independently of being connected to the Prophet ﷺ. And that connection that we have to the Prophet ﷺ is through the salasil al-isnad. And this is one of the reasons why before and after they do every action, and this is the practice in Hadramaut, they would read the Fatiha. Right? They would start every gathering with a Fatiha, and they would end every gathering with a Fatiha. To who? To their teachers and all of the people going back to the Prophet ﷺ, bringing to mind that, you know what, we are insignificant, right? We are just doing the job that the Prophet ﷺ ordered us to do, but the acceptance must come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as though he's accepting it from the Prophet ﷺ, right? And this is why this concept of niyaba and deputization, we are just fulfilling a job, right? Imagine if an ambassador of a certain country starts wanting to act out of his own. Can the ambassador do anything else besides what he is ordered to, or his job prescription, right? He is contained within his job prescription. He can't go out of his job prescription, right? Because he's representing, for example, his country and his country's president. But now imagine if that ambassador starts wanting to do things on his own. What will you do? Kick him out, right? Or even the people then who sent him will disassociate themselves. Say, you know what, we look at that Ugandan judge, right? What did Uganda do to her? She says, we don't want anything to do with her, right? Even though she's from the same country and the same, but when the actions didn't match the ideology and the way, right? And in the same way, if we claim to be adaptive, we do what and how the Prophet taught us to do it. And this is the importance of the Sunnah, because you can only understand and imbibe those things if they come down from heart to heart. Otherwise, the hadith also states, on the day of Qiyamah, people will be brought, right, to the hold of the Prophet ﷺ. And even though he knows who they are and what they did, but he mentions the hadith that he will bring them, the angels will bring, they will be coming towards the hold of the Prophet ﷺ, and as they're about to approach, the angels will come and take them away. And the Prophet will say, but they are my ummah, and the angels will tell the Prophet ﷺ, what? You don't know what they did after you, right? And these are the people that changed the religion or involved in bid'ah, right? And this is the disassociation. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then goes on to say, right? And this chapter or this paragraph is in explaining the importance of, or delineating the manhaj and the tariq that, and the approach that we use in da'wah. بئس الإنسان إنسان ليس له مبدأ أمامه أغلى من الولد وأغلى من الأهل والوطن. Right? What an evil person, or what a bad state a person is in, that in his life he has no principles and no foundations and no leanings, and nothing is more important to him than what? Nothing is more valuable to him than his children, right? And his family and his country. وأغلى من كل شيء في حياته. Right? He doesn't have anything that is more valuable to him than his children, his family, right? His country, and his life that he's living. What is basically saying that if you don't, this is based on that verse of the Quran that Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu qul in kana. The Prophet was ordered to tell the ummah, tell the believers, that if your qul in kana aba'ukum, if your parents and your children and your spouses and your brethren, right, and your trade, right, وَتِجَارٌ تَخْشَوْنَ كَسَادًا وَمَسَاكِنَ, in the homes that you dwell in, are more beloved to you than what? Than Allah and His Prophet and jihad in their path. فَتَرَبَّصُوا حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهُ بِأَمْرِهِ. Then wait for Allah's command to come. There can be nothing more beloved to a person than what? Than Allah, the Prophet ﷺ, and striving in their path. In today's times, we'll say, in our situation, the da'wah, right? And obviously, if jihad has its scope, if a person is able to, then they have to partake in jihad. If these are more beloved to you than these 8 things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, then a person is in dangerous ground, right? هذا إنسان ما طرق القيم. This person who has nothing more important to him than, right, his family, his children, his spouse, his country, and the life that is going about it. This person ما طرق القيم. This person has not understood what it means to be elevated, right? Qiyam means, we say of qiyam, it's like, sometimes they translate it as morals and values, but it's something valuable, right? This person has not understood the value of life, right? وَلَا دَخَلَ بَابَ التَّكْرِيمِ مَوْلَى الْكَرِيمِ جَلَ جَلَالُهُ. And he has not entered into the domain of being honored from the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah only gives honor in this world to people that are doing his work. So this person cannot claim to be someone who is honored in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah gives this condition, right? إنسان لا يحمل بين جوانحه مبدأ يوقن به يقينا يحمله على أن يترك من أجله أوطانا وأولادا وأهل. Right? A person does not carry in his heart any principles or any foundation, right, in which he believes firmly in it, and on account of it he's able to leave his country, leave his children, and leave his family, right? If a person doesn't have anything that is greater to them, do we have any principle, foundation? Is there any motive, objective, right, cause or mission, right, that is important to us, that we are able to leave our families? We find people will travel for business, right? They go for business trips, and they leave their family, and they leave the children, and they leave whatever it is, right? And they go for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes a month, for the sake of business, but they won't do the same thing for the sake of the deen, right? What is this person's position in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? وَأَنْ يَتَحَمَّلَ الْمَشَاقِ, or that he is able to bear difficulties for the sake of this mission. وَكَثِيرٌ مِنَ النَّاسِ حَسِبَ أَنَّ اتصاله بهذا الدين العظيم يكفي أن يقوم فيه ببعض واجباته. Many people, they think, right, that it is sufficient for them to be connected to this deen, this great deen. It is sufficient for them that they just do some of the obligatory duties. And they think that this is enough for me to be fulfilling my duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أو يحافظ على بعض فرائضه, or that they're concerned about some of its obligatory actions. ويكفيه ذلك, and they think that this is sufficient for them. وليس له ضمير ولا شعور يهيئه ويشعره بأنه صاحب مبدأ من أجله سيقاتل ومن أجله يدافع. And he has nothing in his mind or his heart that moves him, or any feeling that prepares him, right, with this great feeling that I am carrying such a mission and such a principle and foundational value in my heart that on account of it I will be willing to fight in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and on account of it I will defend, right, and on account of it I will travel and go to fulfill its obligations. وَمِنْ أَجْلِهِ يُقِيمُ, right, if it means I have to reside in a different locality as well, right, وَمِنْ أَجْلِهِ يَتَحَرَّكُ فِي الْحَيَاةِ, and because of it all of my movements in my life are based upon it, right. وَمِنْ أَجْلِهِ رُبَّمَا غَيَّرَ مَوَازِينَ مَصَالِحِهِ الدُّنْيَوِيَّةِ, in account of it the very way in which he thinks about life will be turned around, right. وَمِنْ أَجْلِهِ رُبَّمَا فَعَلَ وَرُبَّمَا فَعَلَ, and on account of it he will do this and he will do that. A very small example just to bring home the point, right. We all wake our children up for school, right? If we have children, we all wake our children up for school. Do we wake our children up for tahajjud and give that same importance as we wake them up for school? Or will we allow them to sleep through tahajjud over and above fajr salah, right? But school will never let them miss it. This is a person whose their scale or their mizan, what you call the way in which they are looking at the world, is upside down. If you're attaching more importance to your child for waking them up, you find sometimes, they say the merciful mother, the child is sleeping, don't wake them up for fajr. This is a cockeyed view of life. If a person really understands the true value of life and the relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, right, then and I'm not saying don't send children to school, right, but just to bring home the point. If the child doesn't go to school the entire life, but they read tahajjud, right, every single day, in the year after they will be in a much better place than someone who went to school the entire life and got the biggest PhD, but he didn't perform tahajjud salah, right? We're not even talking about fajr salah, because we know and understand that if a person doesn't have tahajjud, then his great spiritual gifts cannot be opened up for him, right? And look at how our lives have been organized. What do we give priority to? Same thing with regards to work, right? The same thing with regards to everything else. Do we give, and is our life based upon what the Prophet ﷺ taught us that's going to bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And if you look at the consumerism lifestyle, it's all about work, and it's all about earning, and it's all about life itself, right? But I'm not saying, obviously, people, we find ourselves in the situation that we find ourselves in. A person, to the best of their ability, must try now to realign their priorities within what is the obligation. For example, there's no excuse for fajr, right? The person you slept at 3:30 in the evening because there's no excuse you can't get up for fajr, right? Oh, but today I had a late night or whatever. There's no excuse. Fajr is, and same thing with children as well. If your children are baligh, right, and you can't expect your children the day they become baligh to start reading salah. When does it start? Right, it starts from the day before, and they're tired. So a merciful father and mother will sprinkle water or throw water on their child, right? Even it makes them upset when they're 7 and 8 and 9 years old, right? To train them. So on the outside, someone will say, no, this is bad parenting, right? But what scale are you looking at, right? What scale are you looking at? And that child will forever thank you the rest of his life, as opposed to a child who was left to sleep, right, their whole life, and they've learned to be lazy and only read the salah when the sun comes up. And then this person 20, 30 years later comes onto the deen and they realize the importance. What will they think of their parents, right? Those merciful parents that let them sleep, right? And so this, Habib is saying that we must have in our hearts something greater than the pleasures of life that moves you, right? And it pushes us to, there must be a mission. And every day that we wake up, our duty is to try and fulfill this mission. And that dictates how we live our life. Right? We don't take the deen and try and fit it into our life. We've got to take our life and fit it into the deen. That is why, for example, in the city of Tarim, you would find why people find it so easy is because for over 1,000 years, life has been organized according to, everything happens around the 5 times salah. Even the lessons of the students, even the way when the shops open and close, everything is around the 5 times salah. You don't have to, you're not at a wrestle and a war in your life to try and, right? They've merged the two so that you can live your life, right? Earn a living, right? Fulfill your responsibilities with your people, your neighbors, your family, everything else, but still give the utmost to the responsibilities of the deen and of da'wah. Now, هذا هو المبدأ الذي جاء به نبيكم محمد صلى الله عليه وصحبه وسلم. Right? These are the mabda, the principles, the foundational values, the things which you attach importance to. These things are what the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم came for. He came to reorganize our priorities. Right? مبدأ بعظمته وجلاله ومكانته وفخامته إذا عرفه أصحابه احتقروا كل شيء مقابله. The Prophet ﷺ came with these values and these foundations and these principles, right? And due to its greatness and its grandeur and its honorable place in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they understood it, when the companions, the Prophet and the companions of the Prophet understood it, احتقروا كل شيء مقابله. They regarded everything else besides it what? As being nothing. And therefore they were able to give up their families and loved ones and health and wealth and everything for the sake of that. In هذا المبدأ هو مبدأكم أنتم. These foundations are the same foundations which you need to have. Habib speaking to the students, which we all need to have. لأنكم على ظهر الأرض تحملون مبدأ سماويا. Because you on the earth as you are living, you are carrying this divine message. تولى رب الأرض والسماء بيانه وإرساله. This divine message which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed it upon himself to protect it and to spread it amongst people, but you are the means of that happening. واختار لكم في تبليغه أحب خلقه إليكم وأكرم العباد إليه. تمام. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose for you the one who is the one that conveyed it to you, his most beloved creation to him, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so these principles that he lived and died for are the same principles that you need to live and die for. And if we are not doing that and we don't have these principles and we are not living and dying for it, then it is a expression of our deficiency in our relationship to Allah and the Prophet ﷺ and our understanding of our relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq and to put into action whatever has been mentioned. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. فاتحة النبي.